In the heart of the American Southeast, along the winding banks of the Tecumseh River, lies a quiet peninsula of land. Today, it is a place of solemn remembrance. But in the spring of 1814, it was the site of a battle that would not only shatter a nation, but also irrevocably shape the future of the United States. This is the story of Horseshoe Bend, a conflict born from a civil war, fueled by a continental resistance, and concluded in a slaughter that paved the way for an empire of cotton and slavery. Before the first American shots were fired, the Muskogee, or Creek Nation, was already at war with itself. Far from a monolithic entity, the Creek Confederacy was a decentralized union of nearly 50 autonomous towns, known as Talwas. For decades, they had faced the relentless pressure of American expansion as settlers pushed deeper into their ancestral lands across Georgia and Alabama. A new federal road cut a scar directly through their territory, physically dividing the nation and accelerating a cultural crisis. This pressure cleaved the Creek Confederacy in two. The lower Creeks, living closer to the American frontier along the Chattahoochee River, increasingly adopted the ways of their new neighbors. Influenced by U.S. Indian agent Benjamin Hawkins, many turned to American-style agriculture and diplomacy, hoping that assimilation was the only path to survival and the preservation of their autonomy. But in the upper Creek towns, nestled in the valleys of the Coosa and Tallapoosa rivers, a powerful resistance was brewing. Many upper Creeks viewed acculturation as a betrayal of their identity and a surrender of their sovereignty. This internal struggle was not merely a political disagreement. It was a profound conflict over the very soul of the Creek Nation, a microcosm of the existential dilemma facing every Native American nation in the path of the young republic: adapt and hope to endure, or resist and face annihilation. The simmering tensions within the Creek Nation were about to be ignited by a firestorm sweeping down from the north. From the Ohio Valley, the Shawnee chief Tecumseh was forging a grand pan-Indian confederacy, a united front to halt the American tide. His message was simple and powerful. The land belonged to all tribes in common and could not be sold by any single chief or faction. In 1811, Tecumseh carried this vision south. His speeches in the upper Creek towns were electrifying, resonating deeply with those who feared the erosion of their traditional ways. He called for a rejection of American culture and a return to their ancestral values, promising that an alliance with the British in the coming war would secure their lands forever. The Creek traditionalists who answered his call became known as the Red Sticks, named for the red-painted war clubs, or atasa, that they carried as a symbol of their defiance. This movement was not an isolated uprising. It was the southern front of a coordinated trans-Appalachian resistance network. The struggle for the Ohio Valley and the struggle for the Alabama territory were now one and the same, a continental conflict for the future of North America. By the summer of 1813, the ideological rift within the Creek Nation had erupted into open civil war. Red Stick warriors attacked the villages and leaders of the accommodationist Creeks who had aligned with the Americans. The conflict would be irrevocably altered on August 30th, 1813, at a fortified homestead known as Fort Mims. Located north of Mobile, Alabama, the fort was a refuge for American settlers, Mississippi militia, and a large number of Lower Creek families who feared the growing power of the Red Sticks. A force of about 700 Red Stick warriors, led by William Weatherford, also known as Red Eagle, stormed the poorly defended stockade during the midday meal. The result was a brutal and overwhelming victory for the Red Sticks. The defenders were overrun, and in the chaos that followed, a slaughter ensued. When the smoke cleared, more than 250 people inside the fort were dead. Militiamen, settlers, and the lower Creeks who had sought American protection. The Red Sticks also took around 100 enslaved African Americans as captives. News of the event spread like wildfire across the American frontier. But the story that was told was not one of a battle in a complex civil war. It was framed as the Fort Mims Massacre, an unprovoked, savage attack on innocent men, women, and children. This narrative, powerful in its simplicity, erased the context of American encroachment and Creek internal division. It created a morally unambiguous justification for a full-scale war of conquest. And it unleashed a man who would become the very personification of American vengeance. To his Creek enemies, he was known as Old Mad Jackson. A major general of the Tennessee militia, Andrew Jackson was a product of the frontier, a man of iron will, fierce ambition, and a deep-seated conviction that American expansion was preordained. When word of Fort Mims reached him, he immediately called for a spirit of revenge to answer the horrid butcheries committed there. Jackson's campaign would be more than merely a punitive expedition. It was the violent implementation of a national policy. He did not view the Native American tribes as sovereign nations to be negotiated with, but as wards of the government and obstacles to progress. In his mind, they had a simple choice: assimilate into American society or be removed from its path. With the authority of the Tennessee governor, Jackson mobilized his militia and prepared to march into Creek territory, not just to defeat the Red Sticks, but to extinguish their world. He was not a rogue commander. He was the ideal agent of an expansionist nation. His personal thirst for retribution perfectly aligned with the country's hunger for land. The winter campaign of 1813 to 1814 was one of relentless brutality. Jackson, often joined by allied Lower Creek and Cherokee warriors who sought to defeat their Red Stick rivals, pushed deep into Alabama. His forces destroyed the villages of Talushatchee and Talladega in punishing assaults that left hundreds of Red Sticks dead. The campaign was a logistical nightmare, plagued by expiring enlistments, scarce supplies, and near mutiny. A lesser commander might have faltered, but Jackson's sheer determination held the army together. After two bloody but indecisive battles at Amukfow and Enitachkopo Creeks, he was forced to temporarily withdraw, but his resolve only hardened. By March of 1814, he had assembled a new, formidable army, reinforced by the 39th U.S. Infantry Regiment. His force now numbered over 3,300 men, well supplied and ready for a final, decisive battle. His target was the last great Red Stick stronghold, a fortified village called Topeka. In their desperation, the Red Sticks chose their ground with remarkable skill. Led by the war chief Menawa, a wealthy and respected leader from the town of Okfuski, about 1,000 warriors and 350 women and children gathered at Topeka. The village was situated on a 100-acre peninsula, a natural fortress protected by three sides by a deep and sharp bend in the Tallapoosa River. Across the neck of land, the warriors constructed a massive barricade. It was a log and earth breastwork stretching over 1,000 feet, standing 5 to 8 feet high, and engineered with 2 rows of firing ports, or loopholes. The wall was not a straight line. It was angled, designed to catch any attacking force in a deadly crossfire. Even Andrew Jackson, a man not given to praising his enemies, was impressed. He wrote that nature furnishes few situations so eligible for defense, adding that barbarians have never rendered one more secure by art. This was not a primitive defense. It was a sophisticated fusion of traditional knowledge and European-style military engineering, a kill zone designed by intelligent men preparing to make their last stand. On the riverbank behind their village, they kept a fleet of canoes, their only hope for escape should the wall be breached.
On the morning of March 27, 1814, two armies faced each other across the neck of the peninsula. One was a coalition of American soldiers and their native allies fighting to secure the frontier for the United States. The other was a confederation of Creek traditionalists fighting for the survival of their world. The disparity in numbers and firepower was immense. Jackson's plan was methodical. He first moved to seal the trap. He dispatched General John Coffee with 700 mounted troops and 600 native allies, Cherokee and Lower Creek warriors, to cross the Tallapoosa downstream and completely encircle the peninsula, ensuring there would be no escape. With the Red Sticks surrounded, Jackson placed his main force of 2,000 men and his two small cannons on a low hill facing the barricade. At 10:30 in the morning, the artillery opened fire. For 2 hours, the cannons bombarded the log wall, but the 6- and 3-pound cannonballs were ineffective. They either flew harmlessly through the gaps in the logs or buried themselves in the thick timber, failing to create a breach. From behind their astonishingly strong defenses, the Red Sticks held firm. The battle turned not on Jackson's orders, but on the initiative of his Native American allies. Stationed across the river with General Coffee's command, a group of Cherokee warriors grew impatient with the futile bombardment. In a moment of spontaneous daring, several of them plunged into the river and swam across to the peninsula. Once ashore, they untied the Red Sticks' fleet of escape canoes and began paddling them back across the river, ferrying hundreds of their fellow Cherokee and Lower Creek warriors to the enemy's rear. This flanking force stormed into the village of Tohopeka, setting the huts ablaze and attacking the Red Stick warriors from behind. The surprise assault sowed chaos, forcing Manawa to divert many of his warriors from the main barricade to defend their families in the village, critically weakening his front line. Jackson seized the opportunity. Seeing the smoke rising from the village and hearing the sounds of battle behind the barricade, he ordered a full-scale frontal assault. Led by the 39th U.S. Infantry, the American line surged forward with fixed bayonets. The fighting at the wall was ferocious, a desperate, close-quarters struggle. Soldiers thrust their bayonets through the portholes, firing muzzle to muzzle with the Red Stick defenders. Among the first to storm over the top of the barricade was a young 3rd lieutenant from Tennessee named Sam Houston. As he rallied his men, a Creek arrow struck him deep in the thigh, a severe wound that would plague him for the rest of his life. Breached from the front and attacked from the rear, the Red Stick defenses collapsed. The battle transformed into a brutal 5-hour running fight across the peninsula. There was no retreat and no surrender. Warriors who tried to escape by swimming the Tallapoosa were systematically shot down by Coffee's men lining the opposite bank. Jackson himself later wrote that the whole margin of the river was strewn with the slain. The sheer scale of the killing revealed the true nature of the conflict. This was not a battle to defeat an enemy army, but a campaign to annihilate a people's ability to resist. By nightfall, the fighting subsided. Jackson's men counted 557 Red Stick bodies on the field, with estimates of another 250 to 300 killed in the river. In a single day, more than 800 of the 1,000 Red Stick warriors had been killed, a casualty rate of over 80%, one of the highest in the history of American warfare. Jackson's own forces suffered 49 killed and 154 wounded. In the darkness, Chief Manawa, wounded 7 times, crawled from beneath the pile of the dead, found an untended canoe, and slipped away down the river, one of the few Red Stick leaders to survive the carnage. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend was the death knell of the Red Stick Rebellion and the Creek Nation's military power. In the months that followed, starving and broken, the surviving Red Stick leaders began to surrender, including William Weatherford, who famously rode into Jackson's camp to offer his life for the women and children of his people. For Andrew Jackson, the victory was transformative. It confirmed his reputation as a ruthless and effective Indian fighter, earned him the nickname Old Hickory, and secured his promotion to Major General in the regular U.S. Army. The road from Horseshoe Bend would lead him to another, even more famous victory in New Orleans, and ultimately to the presidency. The war was over, but the conquest had just begun. On August 9, 1814, Jackson summoned the Creek chiefs to sign the Treaty of Fort Jackson. Acting as the sole negotiator for the United States, he dictated the terms not to the defeated Red Sticks, but to his own Creek allies. The terms were staggering. Jackson demanded the Creek Nation cede 23 million acres of land, more than half of modern Alabama and a large portion of southern Georgia. When the Allied chiefs protested that their land was being taken as punishment for a war they had helped America win, Jackson was unmoved. He declared that the entire Creek Nation was responsible for failing to stop the Red Sticks and must therefore pay the price. Powerless to resist, they signed the treaty, surrendering the heart of their ancestral homeland. The consequences of the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and the Treaty of Fort Jackson extended far beyond the banks of the Tallapoosa River. The vast territory seized from the Creeks was fertile land, perfectly suited for a new and voraciously profitable crop, cotton. The opening of this land unleashed a flood of American settlement into the Deep South, creating what would become the heart of the Cotton Kingdom. This explosive growth in cotton cultivation created a massive, insatiable demand for enslaved labor, fundamentally reshaping the American economy and political landscape. The new slave states of Alabama and Mississippi were carved directly from the ceded Creek territory, strengthening the power of the slaveholding South in the national capital. The battle's impact on Native Americans was equally profound. With Creek power shattered, organized indigenous resistance in the Southeast was no longer viable. The battle was a direct precursor to the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a policy championed by President Andrew Jackson that led to the forced relocation of the remaining southeastern tribes on the tragic Trail of Tears. Thus, a direct line can be drawn from the bend in the Tallapoosa River to the defining conflicts of 19th century America. The battle that destroyed the Creek Nation also fueled the expansion of the American slave state. The victory that made Andrew Jackson a national hero also empowered the Southern planter class, whose defense of their peculiar institution would one day plunge the nation into its own bloody civil war. The slaughter at Horseshoe Bend was not just the end of the Creek War. It was a foundational moment in the building of a new, powerful, and deeply conflicted America.